Now, when it comes to Resident Evil, a lot of people think zombies first and foremost, but come on, let's face facts. We're here because of one real reason, and that is the over-the-top and deliciously devious boss battles that you have in the games. Now, if we're being honest, not all boss battles in the Resident Evil franchise are brilliant, but boy howdy are some of them incredibly difficult. And that's what we're here to talk about today. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are the 10 hardest bosses in Resident Evil history. Number 10. Yawn, Resident Evil and Remake. It seems only appropriate that we kick things off with the very first boss that players encountered way back in 1996. During your ill-fated excursion through the Spencer Mansion, you had to collect all manner of keys and items to open up new pathways full of certain death, and eventually you had no choice but to explore the incredibly foreboding attic, and lo and behold, you were greeted by the gargantuan serpent known as Yawn. For those who were still struggling to get to grips with the tank controls, Yawn posed quite a challenge. Its strikes are fast and has a tendency to fill up a fair chunk of the arena, often trapping you in a corner before sinking its fangs into you. It's entirely possible to simply dash to the end of the room and grab the key, but unless you're able to pull off some pretty pro-gamer magic, Yawn will trap you and you will likely die. Play it safe, however, and it can be toppled, providing you've got enough ammo to take it out. Now, veterans of the series might scoff at this inclusion, but just cast your minds back for a moment to your first trip to this attic. I bet it was pretty bloody terrifying, wasn't it? Number 9. Alexia Ashford, Resident Evil Code Veronica. Now, Resident Evil Code Veronica was something of a weird step for the Resident Evil canon. For what was meant to be the next evolution in the Resident Evil franchise, it wallowed a little too heavily in the past, and any steps forward it did take went straight into the realms of pretty over-the-top and unbridled frustration. One of its saving graces, though, was the wondrously over-the-top villain Alexia Ashford. This platinum blonde, stereotypically English virus queen didn't seem like too much of a threat on the surface, but underneath, she is one tough customer. Her humanoid form is fairly tricky, with her ability to create walls of flames to bottleneck you into certain positions, as well as her one-shot immolation attack that can spell an instant game over if she manages to touch you. But it's her final form that really makes one's piss boil. Now, in the form of a gigantic insect queen, she fills up most of the arena and rains poison down upon you, alongside spawning parasitic babies. Get past that stage and you'll still have to shoot her down once she sprouts wings and begins spewing acidic blood at you, all the while zooming around the arena and evading your attacks. It is truly infuriating stuff. Number 8. Super Tyrant Mr. X, Resident Evil 2 Remake. Throughout the first chunk of the Resident Evil 2 remake, you'll be pursued by the pasty-faced beefcake known as Mr. X. He's an incredibly intimidating presence, but imagine our surprise, however, when we realized that despite his imposing nature, he's fairly easy to evade and even easier to incapacitate if you've got the right weapon. Considering he's a pushover throughout most of the game, it came as quite a shock to many when he returned at the tail end for one last hurrah, complete with a giant claw that he plans on using to liberate your organs from their rather fleshy prison. Now, like many other bosses on this list, you'll have to fight this uber version of Mr. X in a confined space, one that only gets more claustrophobic as debris begins to fall around you. And said rock and rubble can be useful for evading his instant death attack, but more often than not, you'll find yourself stuck between, well, a rock and a muscle man as he'll rain his fury down upon you like nobody's business. After a couple of tries, you'll become aware of his tells and how best to avoid him, but it's highly unlikely that you'll come out of this battle unscathed the first time. Number 7. Skag Dead, Resident Evil Revelations. For what was essentially just a handheld spin-off to the main series, a great amount of care and attention went into Resident Evil Revelations, in particular its vast array of gruesome oceanic monsters that wanted nothing more than to eat your face. Case in point, the Skag Dead. Unusual for a Resident Evil game, in that the arena that you fight the Skag Dead is fairly large, giving you plenty of breathing room as well as a hefty smattering of gas canisters for you to utilize if he gets too close. It was still incredibly difficult, because in most cases, these additions don't count for the fact that the Skag Dead moves rather quickly and puts intense pressure on you at all times. This forces you to think on your feet and fire shots off in the small windows of opportunity that you're granted, because if you let the Skag Dead invade your personal space, well, you're gonna get hurt. He hits like an armored truck, and the malformed chainsaw that he brandishes on his right arm will absolutely decimate your health bar. Throw in his ability to lay traps as well as the few base enemies that fight alongside him, and you've got one of the most exhilarating boss battles in the entire series. Number 6. The Infected Bat, Resident Evil 0. Capcom Capcom tried to have their cake and eat it with Resident Evil 0. They kept the fires of the classic Resident Evil burning, i.e. the tank controls and fixed camera angles, but also piled on a bunch of new mechanics that completely shook up the formula, most notably being the ability to control two characters simultaneously. The results are somewhat mixed and often hinder the experience, especially when it came to boss fights, but none are as egregious as the dreaded infected bat. Flying enemies have been around since the very first game, and their increased maneuverability always felt at odds with the tank controls, and this fight is the absolute peak of that tragic flaw. The highly mobile and erratic movements of the infected bat make it difficult to position yourself to attack, which either means you'll miss entirely or put yourself directly in its path of destruction. Even when you do manage to find a stable position to unload your hot leaded fury, you'll be besieged by a swarm of smaller bats that will slowly whistle away at your health bar, which feels kind of like an extra kick in the nethers on top of what is already fairly generous nether kicking to begin with. Number 5. The Ivern Twins, Resident Evil The Umbrella Chronicles. Chances are that unless you're a Resident Evil superfan, you've likely never played the spin-off titles The Umbrella Chronicles or The Dark Side Chronicles. These games throw away the series' third-person mechanics in favor of an on-rails shooter that recapped key plot points from earlier games, as well as expanding on the backstories for some of the more interesting side characters. For long-time fans, these games were a special treat, giving us a lot of new lore to sink our rotten teeth into, but with new lore comes new monsters to tackle. And say hello to the Ivern Twins, superpowered tyrant variants that sadly make their appearances only in these games. The Ivern Twins are not as bulky as their predecessors, but still these regular-sized lads are hyper-mobile and astonishingly aggressive. Even though you play the fight as Wesker and are able to pull off all manner of wall runs and slow-mo dodges, the Iverns are perfectly capable of keeping pace with you. The fight itself is incredibly demanding, requiring players to have tiger-like reflexes for dodging and a keen eye for headshots to stop them in their tracks. They tend to mix up their strategy throughout the fight as well, utilizing the environment and an unfortunately placed rocket launcher to make your life a living hell. Number 4. Wesker, Resident Evil 5. Say what you will about Resident Evil 5, but the truth is, it is a wonderfully fun game. The diverse enemy types, ridiculous set-piece battles, and incredible roster of boss monsters make it one of the most enjoyable games in the series. Plus, it gave fans a chance to finally lay some serious smackdown on bastard man extraordinaire Albert Wesker. Now, most encounters with him across the game's meaty campaign pose a significant challenge, but it is the final battle inside a volcano that really pushed players to their limit. Not only does he deal tremendous damage if you allow him to get close enough, but more often than not, players would have expended most of their ammo in the preceding fight, leaving them with little to no hope of finishing the job. This would mean having to replay earlier levels to amass enough ammo to jump back into the final battle, making the whole thing into an exercise in tedium. The lack of ammo situation aside, those who decided to play the game solo automatically found themselves at a disadvantage, as Sheva's very wonky AI is just not suited to this battle, adding in an extra layer of challenge to what is an already rather grueling affair. Number 3. Jack Norman, aka Ultimate Abyss, Resident Evil Revelations. We're back to Revelations once again, and yet another oceanic nightmare of titanic proportions. Mr. Jack Norman, or as he's known in his inhuman form, Ultimate Abyss, is the final boss of the game, and as you'd expect, he is one tough cookie. This guy embodies all of the hallmarks that you'd associate with the usual tyrant enemies, but with a much bigger bag of tricks. Not simply content with stomping towards you like his predecessors, he can teleport around the room at an alarmingly fast rate, forcing you to completely rethink your positioning and leaving you with very little time to fight back. He's also capable of creating clones of himself, which, if you're truly unlucky, can lead you to being sandwiched between them in the prime position for a world of hurt. Ultimate Abyss is a genuinely challenging fight that asks a lot of the player, but the sweet satisfaction you get from taking him down is nigh on unparalleled in the rest of the series. Number 2. Nemesis Clock Tower Battle, Resident Evil 3. Now, generally speaking, any encounter with this staple-faced creep could have qualified for this list, but we've got to give it to the skirmish outside the clock tower for being the most hellishly difficult. Unlike all of your previous encounters with Nemesis where you could just outrun him, this one is mandatory and escape is impossible. You're confined to a small courtyard with no choice but to throw everything you've got at him, because that's exactly what he's going to do to you. Nemesis is arguably at his most aggressive here and will not allow you any time to breathe. Your only hopes of beating him are to have a decent amount of grenade launcher and magnum ammo, as well as a keen grasp on the game's somewhat unreliable dodge mechanic. Even with those helpful additions, you'll still be hoping and praying that every shot you fire will be the one that takes him down. Now, you can make this fight a little easier by making different choices earlier on in the game, which will result in Nemesis not having his rocket launcher for the fight, but even with that extra advantage, you're still going to be down for one hell of a scrap. And number 1, the T78, Resident Evil Code Veronica. At first glance, the T78 doesn't seem any more threatening than any other inclusion on this list, but you know what? I can assure you that no other boss in Resident Evil's history has caused so many first-time players to throw in the towel. Not only is this tyrant variant a hyper-aggressive damage sponge that you must fight in an aircraft's confined cargo bay, but you also run the risk of falling out of the exposed hatch. You also can't rely on bullets to defeat him, as the only way to successfully win is to knock him out of the plane using a rigged up cargo crate, and you can only do that once you've weakened him enough. All of that amounts to an incredibly challenging fight, but there's one extra little detail that pushes things over the edge. You see, the T78 has an incredibly large health pool, meaning that you need a lot of firepower in your inventory to take him down. If you reach this section of the game and you're underpowered, well, you literally stand no chance of winning. And if you're one of the unfortunates who didn't have enough ammo and decided to save directly before entering the boss room, you literally can't progress and have no choice but to start the whole game again. Seriously, screw this guy. And there we go, my friends. Those were the 10 hardest bosses in Resident Evil history. I hope that you enjoyed that, and please let me know what you thought about it down in the comments section below. As always, I've been Jules. You can go follow me over on Twitter at RetroJ with a 0, or you can swing by Live and Let's Dice, where I do all of my streaming outside of work, and it'd be great to see you over there, my friends. But before I go, I just want to say one thing. Hope you're treating yourself with love and respect, because you deserve all of the best things in life, and do not let anything or anyone else tell you otherwise, alright? The bosses that we talked about today may try to beat you around, but don't take any of their noise and send them right back to the nether, and then go out there and enjoy the rest of your day doing what you do to the best of your abilities, my friend, because you can do this. I believe in ya. As always, I've been Jules. You have been awesome. Never forget that, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.